Welcome to TriloTalk. This is a podcast dedicated to topics that we think are important to the profession of medical writing. And our goal is to bring these topical issues and ideas to the forefront and spark conversations in the medical writing community. I'm Julia Forjanic Klapproth, Senior Partner at Trilogy Writing and Consulting, an Indegene company. Today I'm here with Eleanor Steele, who's a freelance consultant working as the MedCom's mentor to provide specialist training and mentoring to medical writers and consultancy to agencies around building, nurturing, and developing their medical writing teams. Eleanor and I connected at the last EMWA conference, where I listened to her give a talk titled Crafting Impactful Medical Communications Through Storytelling. And literally everything she said was what I usually say when teaching regulatory writers what effective communication is, which is why I decided that this was somebody I wanted to do a podcast with. And her session was looking at practical techniques to craft texts that resonate with audiences and communicate effectively. Now, many of you may remember that the very first episode of TriloTalks highlighted the importance of using lean writing to craft story versus storage of data in the documents we write. And as I listened to her speak about her approach to this, I realized we should pick this idea up again, as it still remains important, and particularly with the use of AI tools that may tend to reproduce data in text, but not really focus on crafting the story of those data. So I also want to point out that in this episode, we're going to move beyond the boundaries of pure regulatory writing, which I know is where our safe space usually is, and encompass the realm of medical affairs, because impactful communication is needed in all domains of medical writing. So, Eleanor, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today, Julia.
So, I'm so happy to have you here today so that we can talk about how you take complex scientific information and convey it clearly. One of the things I loved about your session was the idea of the myths about storytelling. You pointed out common misconceptions like storytelling is unscientific or simplistic, which is something I hear regularly as well. I frequently encounter this idea when I'm with clients and I say, well, we have to get the story. And they go, oh, we shouldn't talk about telling a story. Let's call it the message.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I frequently talk about in my workshops is how data should tell its own story, or no, data doesn't tell its own story. Data doesn't speak for itself. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There are so many different myths and misconceptions, but I think it all kind of boils down to the fact that we see stories as something that's made up. And we need to be using the evidence base. We need to be very factual. We need to make sure that everything that we write about as medical writers is based on a published reference, and it's, you know, the hard data. But we don't take in information as just chunks of data.
No.
As humans, we communicate through story. And so for any kind of communication to be effective, there needs to be some kind of story behind it, not just here is a piece of information, remember it, interpret it, use it. Yep. And without that storytelling aspect, medical communications are not going to be effective, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. I talk to when I'm giving these workshops, when I talk to my writers, this is something I frequently touch on. One of the things I tell people is, you know, if all in the regulatory space, if all the agencies wanted us to do was give them the data, we wouldn't actually write text at all. We'd just send them the tables, right? The data's already in the tables.
Here it is.
Our job is to say what we think that data means. And that's exactly what you were hitting on.
Yeah. And also pull out the pieces of data that are going to be relevant, because not every audience is going to need the same data for the same content.
Exactly.
And knowing which data should be selected and how it should be presented is all part of crafting that effective story. But the problem is it's really hard to do that, partly because telling stories and communicating through stories is something that we do instinctively as humans when we're trying to sort of talk to people.
Exactly.
But doing it intentionally in a piece of writing can be very difficult, especially when you are collaborating with a lot of different people who have different viewpoints and different objectives, and you're all coming from slightly different perspectives.
Yeah.
And that can be where the storytelling just disappears because nobody is really focusing on that. They're focusing on the data.
On the data, yeah. So I am really interested in the fact that you developed a technique to actually help people think more clearly, but how to ensure they're hitting home for their target audience, right?
Yeah.
And you called it the PRISM framework. Can you tell us a little bit about what this is and how you came up with the idea?
Sure, yeah. So my background is medical writing. I've been in medical communications since 2004, and I worked my way up the medical writing side of things, really kind of in the medical affairs space. And for a long time, I have been in a senior position, briefing other writers, reviewing their work, training people, mentoring people. And that's really what led me to become the Medcoms mentor when I went freelance in 2018. So I have worked with a lot of writers and seen the problems that people come up with when they are trying to create something effective and meaningful from complex data. And that has sort of helped me boil down the core components that will help you create an effective story, no matter what kind of information that you are trying to put together, no matter what kind of content you're trying to put together.
Right.
And I liked the concept of it being a prism because it's bringing the story into focus. And so we're breaking apart the different elements of story to pull the story into focus, which is kind of like, you know, light through a prism. So PRISM stands for people, rationale, information, structure, and method. So these 5 elements go into the PRISM framework. And by thinking about each of those elements, it helps us pull together the story in the right way, but it also gives us a touchstone to go back to while we're creating the content, while we're revising it, because this is often where things fall down. We may well start off with an outline that is spot on. It's got the right story. It's bringing in the audience in the right way, promising something that they want to know about or want to know how to do, and then takes them through the data at the right points in the right way, and then finishes off by giving them the next steps or the unanswered questions and the broader context. And that kind of effective story arc can be there in the outline, but then when you have 15 different people reviewing it at 7 different drafts and it goes over, you know, a year of development, you can really move away from that initial really strategic starting point with the best intentions in the world. It's very easy for that to happen. But having this kind of PRISM framework as a touchstone means that at each stage you can be thinking, okay, is this comment from this author or from this client actually helping us tell the story, or is it moving us away? And if it is moving us away, does that mean we need to change our story? Because, you know, things evolve as we are creating content very often.
Absolutely.
Maybe, you know, new references are published, new data comes up. There are things that will change the story that we need to tell during the process.
Even just as you get deeper into the data and you start to understand the nuances of it.
Absolutely.
And you think, oh, this is an interesting angle that we hadn't thought about before, right? So things come up in multiple different ways. So you have this great mnemonic, which serves as an anchor to remind people what we need to be thinking about, but you do a little bit more with it. It's not just a mnemonic. How do you apply this framework?
Okay, so when I was preparing for our conversation today, I thought about how I could apply the PRISM framework to our conversation.
Okay.
And so I obviously need to think about all 5 aspects. And the first one is people. So you are the person I am talking to. So I need to think about you, obviously, when I am preparing. And we've had conversations in the past. I know that you have seen my MWOR presentation. So we've got a little bit of history there. But there's also a broader audience, hopefully, who are listening to the podcast. So how would you describe the audience for TriloTalks?
It's medical writers, predominantly in the regulatory space.
Yeah.
They're distributed across, it can be freelancers, it can be people working for CROs, companies like my own that are specialized, but also for pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
So, and also, I imagine a smaller proportion in the medcom space.
Yeah. Yeah, but everybody within that group really has a medical writing focus.
Yeah.
And whether that is somebody who is doing the medical writing or reviewing or briefing or actually kind of commissioning medical writers, if they're in that kind of client role, they will all be coming into contact with words written by medical writers, whether or not they're writing them themselves. So this group needs to make sure that they are creating content or helping content be created in an effective way for the audiences that they are then communicating with. And those audiences may be quite broad. So there may be the kind of regulatory bodies who are going to be approving drugs and things like that. Also the investigators who may well be involved in the studies and things like that.
Reading the protocols, reading the investigator brochures.
Exactly. Potentially patients, if there are patient materials as well. So there's a wide range of different types of content. And by thinking about the audience for this podcast, I want to support them in creating content that's going to be effective for those audiences. So this isn't just about making it easier to write for healthcare professionals or regulatory bodies. This is about helping you think about who your audience is, but who also maybe the broader stakeholders are, because there are often lots of different balls we have to keep in the air in terms of the audience when we are creating content. But I would always suggest having a core audience in mind. Yes. Because if we try to do everything for every audience, our content will get very muddled and it's not going to be effective. We've all read things or watched things that weren't necessarily created with us in mind as the core audience. But if there is a core audience that is the focus, we can kind of filter for that. And it helps the core audience, but it also helps everybody else to kind of understand where we're coming from, rather than it being confusing in terms of how things are put together, how data would be selected, and maybe the level of detail and things like that. So having that core audience means that anybody interacting with the content can use it more effectively because it's very clear who it's for and why it is being targeted at that audience.
Okay, so in the context of this exercise, would we say our core audience is, let's say, medical writers working in the medcom space?
I would say it would be medical writers in general.
Okay.
And the supplementary audiences would be the people who are briefing and reviewing them, and the clients who are commissioning that work. And then further out, we would have the audiences for their work. So that's kind of how I would see this broadening through the different layers of audience, the different people that we're thinking about.
Great. And so let's try and apply this to something as an example then.
Yeah. So for the podcast conversation, the next stage, once we know the audience, would be thinking about the rationale, so the R in the PRISM framework. And this is quite nebulous for a lot of projects. Often we're kind of given quite a broad objective, just like communicate the data. But without a clear objective, it can be very hard to apply it effectively. There can be the temptation to just chuck in all of the data where we're literally blinding people with science, or we can just sort of put in bits of data without really connecting the dots because we don't know exactly what we're trying to do with it.
Yes.
And so the audience is left in the dark to some extent.
Yep.
A clear objective helps us focus on what we're trying to say and why we are trying to say it for that particular audience. And that sort of becomes the guiding star for whatever we are creating.
Right.
And for our conversation, I would say that the rationale that I'm working to is that I want to provide a tool to make writing effectively, creating effective storytelling much easier for medical writers, because we are breaking it down into this easy framework that they can think about and use as they are developing projects.
Okay. Got it.
Super. So the next stage of PRISM is the information.
Right.
Okay, so this conversation is obviously a little different from a medical writing project, where the information that we're using is usually things like published references or a data pack and things like that. Now, we need to make sure that whatever we are creating, we are selecting the right information and using it effectively. So selecting that information is much easier when we know who we're communicating with, and we know what we are trying to communicate with them. So thinking about the people that we're communicating with and the rationale for what we are trying to say to those people and why we're trying to say it means that we can look at the data or the references in front of us and go, well, yeah, I know why they need to understand this particular piece of data, because it's going to help them understand how to meet a current unmet clinical need, or it's going to help them understand how to select a particular treatment for a particular subgroup of patients, or whatever it is. But having that kind of understanding of the people and the rationale means that the information is much easier to wrangle, because we are often faced with a huge volume of things that we could include.
Exactly.
And selecting the right things, often in very kind of limited containers, can be a challenge. You know, if you're trying to write an abstract for a conference and you've got 100 data tables, 250 words to play with, it can be a really overwhelming challenge if you haven't gone, okay, this is who I am trying to communicate with, and this is what I am trying to communicate with them and why. And then it makes it much easier to narrow down exactly what you're selecting and why you're selecting it. And that whole process just makes writing the information into the content much easier.
Yeah, so much more streamlined. The example I often use is your data set, all the data you've got is like walking up to a big dessert buffet. And your stomach can only hold so much. And you have to pick which one's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck today, in the mood that I'm in. What do I feel like having? I can't eat everything. And that's exactly what you're talking about. You have to know. And I love this idea that you're really giving guardrails to how you select it.
And I think it's an important way of thinking about it, because generally as medical writers, we are writing for audiences that we are not part of. So the things that we personally find interesting or impactful may not be the things that our target audience are interested in. Or that they care about. You know, I remember working on a paper years ago where my client was incredibly invested in the PK data for the drug that we were working on, because it showed significant differences from their main competitor. And so they wanted everything to be all about the PK. And then when we talked to the clinicians, they were like, we don't care about the PK, we care about the safety. And so we were coming from completely the wrong angle, because the client who I was working with really loved the PK data, and it was, lovely as PK data goes. But if you're not going to be giving the audience what they need, then they're not going to remember the data. They're not going to know what to do with it. They're not going to be able to apply it in their clinical practice, or take away what they need from it, and they're not going to pass that message on to others as well. So thinking about their perspective is so critical when you are selecting information.
Absolutely. I have an exercise that I do with writers where I give them a single set of data. It's 3 tables. And then they have to write a summary of it for experts, for first-year med students, for nurses, and for a textbook for high school students.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a really lovely range of different.
And it's so and you see kind of the light bulb moment as it's all the same starting point.
Yeah.
But you're going to tell those people completely different things.
Yeah.
And if you don't stop at the beginning and understand what that person you're writing for needs from it, well, you'll end up writing the stuff for the expert, for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And to actually kind of get the content created, the next stage of PRISM helps you figure out how you're going to do that by looking at the structure. So there are a couple of different aspects of structure that we need to think about. There's the narrative arc, so kind of having a clear path through the story that you're trying to tell. So something that will bring the audience in at the beginning, something where you're giving them the meaty content that they want, and then tying it up at the end, making it clear what they should do next, or the maybe unanswered questions to give the context, because we don't always have all of the answers, but that sort of clear way through the story is very important. But it's not the only aspect of structure we need to be thinking about, because a lot of the content that we're writing will have specific structural requirements. And that might be, for a clinical paper, introduction, methods, results, discussion and conclusions. For a clinical study report, there are obviously very kind of structured elements that need to go in, and all of these kind of things have their own structural aspects. And then there are some projects that don't necessarily have a specific structure, but by deciding how we want to structure it at the beginning, making that decision proactively rather than just sort of seeing how it turns out, we are going to have a more effective piece of content. So, if you're doing a presentation for a congress, it may not start off by having a structure that you are given, but thinking about how you want to structure it and how you want to get that story arc across to the audience will mean that you're going to tell the story more effectively, but also not end up writing something that's way too long, because that is often a risk if you don't have a clear structure from the beginning.
Yeah. And I think it's such a beautiful point that we have to think about this as a story.
Yeah.
And a story has a natural flow, right? You lead people into it by introducing different aspects of it, and then you build it, right? And then it wanes out the other side. And it doesn't matter what you're writing. You should always do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the clickbait principle, isn't it? You need to get people interested. You need to kind of show them that this is something that will give them information that they need, or help doing something that they want to improve on, or something that is of interest to them. And by the end of the story, you need to have paid off that interest.
Right. Exactly.
unlike most clickbait. But,
Yeah, exactly. We actually deliver.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's the M.
The M, method. So this has a couple of different angles as well. So part of it is the actual type of content that you're putting together. Is it a PowerPoint presentation? Is it a Word document? Is it a script for a video? Thinking about the requirements for that type of content. Does it need to be visual? Does it need to be short, punchy text? Does it need to have pop-ups that are going to be accessible to people who need a bit more information? Yes. Those kind of details will help make sure that we are putting together our content in the right way. Mm-hmm. But we also need to think about our own method, because everybody has their own writing processes. Sure. And our methods are just as important as the method for putting together a PowerPoint presentation where, you know, people aren't going to go to sleep because it's massive blocks of text that your eyes just slide off, kind of thing. You know, we've got to balance both. So I remember when I was starting off as a medical writer, I felt like I was doing something wrong because I couldn't just start at the beginning and write all the way through to the end in an effective way. Yeah. I would dip in and out of sections, and I would pull in data for something, and then I would go back to the introduction and I would look at the conclusions, and, you know, I would do it in what seemed to me at the time as a bit of a haphazard way. Mm. And it only occurred to me much later, when I was really thinking about this in terms of mentoring other people, really, that's because I need to kind of look at things in layers to evolve the story that I'm telling. I need to start off with a clear plan of what I want to do and why. Yeah. That helps me make sure that I'm looking at the right information and pulling that in. But it's very hard to start at the beginning and know exactly what you're going to get at the end without kind of doing the middle first, and then going back and saying, this is the introduction to what I have got, and this is the conclusion, this is the summing up of that story. Yeah. It's an iterative process, and it's okay that is my method. Yeah. Adopting somebody else's writing process is not going to necessarily help you do a good job. And I think there can be a lot of writing advice that is quite didactic and specific because the person giving it has found a way that works for them. But I think it's much more important to find a way that works for you, and really lean into that and hone that process rather than trying to adopt something that somebody else says works for them. I completely agree with you. I frequently have, let's say, less experienced medical writers ask me, you know, which piece should I start with in the document? And I always say, it doesn't matter. Start with the piece that gets you going. Yeah. Right? Maybe one that gives you direction. I do like to say, if you're writing a manuscript or something like that, it's a good idea to know what your conclusion is. Yeah. Because that's your rationale, right? That's exactly where you're heading. Exactly. But, you know, beyond that, if getting the results down on paper gets your writing juices flowing, start there. You know, like, everybody writes differently. Exactly. And if you are struggling with something, then it's often a good idea to just go and do something else for a little while. Work on another project. I find I am most efficient and effective when I'm working on multiple things, because I run out of steam with one project after a couple of hours. And there will be things that I find I just can't make sense of, or I can't get my head around. But if I go and work on something else, by the time I come back, I've figured it out. Yeah. And it can be as simple as not even going to another project, but another part of the document. Absolutely. Go to a different section, a different topic, a different area, and it just kind of clears your head. You start working on that, and then you freeze it up to come back to the other place. Yeah, I know exactly. You don't have to do it in a linear way. No.
No, excellent. Well, Eleanor, this has been really insightful. I love this idea of having this mnemonic that helps really guide you through the steps of the things you have to think about. And this idea of storytelling is one that's really close to my heart. My business partner, Barry Dries, and I have long said that if we could communicate more clearly and make text resonate with people, we could save Western civilization.
Oh, yeah.
And I think your PRISM framework is such a lovely tool to make it easier for medical writers to use effective storytelling techniques, right? So maybe if people wanted to find out more about your training and resources for freelancers, where should they go?
Yeah, so I have a website, medcomsmentor.com, which has all of the information about my training and mentoring for medical writers. And I also run a community for freelancers, which is the Medcoms Workbook, which you can find at medcomsworkbook.com. And this community has a lot of support and resources for freelancers. And so that is a great place to go if you're looking for training as a freelancer. But it's also a great place to go if you actually need freelance support, because we circulate freelance support requests to our community of over 330 medical communications specialists who range from the regulatory end of things all the way through to the promotional end and everything in between. So if you need any freelance support, then you can submit a request for free and we will send that out to our community as well.
Sounds amazing. So all you freelancers out there, go look this up because it really sounds like a fabulous resource.
Thank you.
Eleanor, it was so good to have you with me today. I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you for listening to TriloTalk today. If you have feedback you'd like to share, or if you have any ideas for future topics you'd like us to cover, particularly something you think the community should be talking about, we would love to hear it. We would like this to be an ongoing conversation with medical writers at large, and you can send us your comments on our Twitter feed or our LinkedIn page. Just a reminder, you can find all our episodes of TriloTalk podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, and trilogywriting.com/TriloTalk. Have a great rest of your day.